You know, I never thought I'd be the kind of man who sits around feeling sorry for himself. 70 years on this earth, and I've always been the one people came to when they needed something fixed, something solved, something handled. But here I am, and I need to tell someone about the day that changed everything. It was my 70th birthday. 70. Hard to believe, really. When you're young, 70 seems ancient, like this far off number you'll never reach. But time has this way of sneaking up on you, doesn't it? One day you're 30, working 16-hour days to build something for your family, and well, the next you're 70 and wondering if any of it mattered. My kids had promised to come over for dinner. Nothing fancy, they said, just family time. And honestly, that's all I wanted. I'm not one for big celebrations, never have been. Give me my children and grandchildren around my dinner table, and that's celebration enough. I spent the morning cleaning the house, which probably sounds ridiculous for a 70-year-old man, but Maria, my housekeeper, only comes twice a week now, and I wanted everything perfect. I even went to the store and bought steaks, the good ones, the kind I used to splurge on when the kids were little, and we were celebrating something special. When they started arriving, my heart, God, it felt so full. My son David, with his wife, and 2 boys, my daughter Sarah with her husband and their girl, and my youngest, Michael, with his teenage son. 3 generations under one roof. This is what I worked for, I thought. This is why I missed those Little League games, why I worked weekends, why I built what I built. But something felt off. You know how sometimes you can sense tension in a room? It was like everyone was checking boxes, going through the motions. The hugs were quick. The conversations felt forced, but I pushed it down, told myself I was being paranoid. It's my birthday. They're here. That's what matters. We sat down to eat, and I'd made everyone's favorites alongside those steaks. Took me most of the afternoon, but I didn't mind. Never minded. That's what fathers do, right? We provide. We take care of our own. My grandson Tommy, he's 10, was glued to his phone instead of eating. His dad, David, barely looked up from his own phone to tell him to put it away. But Tommy got frustrated. You know how kids do. And he said something that, well, it stopped my heart. Why do I have to sit here with useless old people anyway? This is so boring. Grandpa doesn't even do anything anymore. The whole table went silent. I mean, dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. That's how quiet it got. I felt my knife and fork freeze in my hands, and this cold sensation just spread through my chest like ice water. But then, and this is the part that really got me, my other grandchildren started nodding. Not all of them, but enough. My granddaughter Emma, she's 14 and usually such a sweet girl, she actually laughed and said, I mean, Tommy's not wrong. Like, what does Grandpa even do now besides sit around? I looked around that table, at the faces of people I'd given my whole life to, and I waited. Waited for one of my children to speak up, to tell their kids that what they'd just said was cruel and wrong. Waited for someone to remind these children who had paid for their clothes, their schools, their family vacations. But they just sat there. David, Sarah, Michael, they all just looked uncomfortable and went back to cutting their steaks. Like nothing had happened. Like their father hadn't just been called useless by his own grandchildren. I set down my utensils very carefully, folded my hands in my lap, and I didn't say a word. Not one single word. Because sometimes, when you've been gut punched like that, silence is all you can manage. The conversation moved on. They talked about school projects and weekend plans and who was doing what, like those words hadn't just shattered something fundamental between us. Like calling their grandfather useless was just normal dinner conversation. And me? I sat there, listening to these people I'd built my entire life around, realizing that somewhere along the way, I'd become nothing more than a burden to them, an old man taking up space at his own dinner table. But here's something about being 70 and being in business as long as I have been. You learn to keep your cards close to your chest. You learn that sometimes the most powerful move is the one nobody sees coming. They had absolutely no idea what they just set in motion. But my lawyer, he was going to make it very, very clear to them real soon. That silence at the dinner table, it stayed with me for days. But you know what? It also got me thinking about who I used to be, back when my opinion mattered in this family. I wasn't born into money, not by a long shot. My father was a factory worker, came home every night with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his bones. My mother took in sewing to help make ends meet. We weren't poor exactly, but we knew the value of every dollar that came through our door. When I was 18, I made a promise to myself. I was going to build something better for my family. Not just better than what I had growing up, but something solid, something lasting, something my children could be proud of. I started working construction right out of high school, learning the trade from men who'd been swinging hammers since before I was born. 12-hour days in the summer heat, my hands raw and bleeding until they finally toughened up. But I wasn't just working. I was watching, learning how businesses operated, how money moved, how deals got made. By the time I was 25, I'd saved enough to buy my first property. Nothing fancy, just a little house that needed work. I fixed it up nights and weekends, sold it for a profit, and bought 2 more, then 4. Then I started my own construction company. David was born when I was 28, and I remember holding him in the hospital, this tiny person who was counting on me for everything. I made another promise that night. This boy would never want for anything, neither would any child that came after him. Sarah came 2 years later, then Michael 3 years after that. 3 kids, and I was determined to give them the childhood I'd dreamed of having. The big house, the family vacations, the college funds that started growing from the day they were born. You want to know what that looked like? That looked like me leaving the house at 5:30 in the morning and getting home after dark most nights. That looked like missing school plays because I was closing deals, missing Little League games because I was on job sites, missing bedtime stories because I was building something bigger than just today. I told myself it was temporary. Once the business was established, once we had real security, I'd slow down. I'd be there for all the little moments. But somehow, temporary became permanent. And before I knew it, my kids were graduating high school, and I was still chasing the next project, the next opportunity. But here's the thing. They never wanted for anything. Not one single thing. Private schools? Check college tuition paid in full. Check David wanted to start his own business after college, so I co-signed his loan and helped him get established. Sarah's wedding? I spared no expense. Gave her the fairy tale day she'd dreamed about since she was little. Michael wanted to travel Europe after graduation. I made it happen. When the grandchildren started coming, I thought, finally, I can be the grandfather I maybe wasn't able to be as a father. I can spoil them, spend time with them, share all the wisdom I've gathered over 7 decades. I set up college funds for each of them before they could even walk. I was there for birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. I taught Tommy how to throw a baseball, helped Emma with her math homework, listened to all of Michael's boys' stories about soccer practice. Or at least, I thought I was there. I thought I was present in their lives in a way that mattered. But sitting at that dinner table, listening to those words, useless, doesn't do anything anymore. I started to wonder if I'd been fooling myself all along. Maybe to them, I'd always just been the guy who wrote the checks, the grandfather who showed up with gifts but never really connected. Maybe that's all I'd ever been to any of them, the provider, the bank, The old man who made their comfortable lives possible, but was never really seen as a person worth knowing. The more I thought about it over those quiet days after my birthday, the more I realized something that shook me to my core. I had spent 50 years building a legacy for people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. And you know what the really hard part was? I wasn't even sure I could blame them for it. The days after that birthday dinner, I kept replaying every single moment in my head. You know how your mind does that sometimes. Just loops the same scene over and over until you've memorized every painful detail. I kept thinking about Tommy's face when he said those words. There was no malice in it, no intention to hurt. And somehow, that made it worse. To him, calling me useless wasn't cruel. It was just obvious, like stating that the sky is blue or that water is wet. But it was Emma's laugh that really got to me. This girl I'd held as a baby, whose first steps were toward me, whose nightmares I'd chased away when she stayed overnight. She looked at me and agreed that I was useless. Not with anger, not with spite, just with this casual certainty that cut deeper than any knife. I started paying attention after that, really paying attention to how my family interacted with me. And let me tell you, once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. The next week, David called. For just a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe he'd been thinking about what happened. Maybe he wanted to apologize, to talk things through like men do. But no, he needed help with his mortgage payment. Business had been slow, and could I just, help them out this month? Just this once, Dad. We're good for it. Just this once. Except it wasn't just this once, was it? It was every few months for the past 3 years. And I always said yes, because that's what fathers do. We help. We provide. Even when our kids are 45 years old and should probably be standing on their own 2 feet by now. I said yes again, transferred the money that same day. But this time, I noticed something I'd been blind to before. David didn't ask how I was doing, didn't mention the birthday dinner, didn't even stay on the phone long enough for a real conversation. Just, thanks, Dad, you're a lifesaver, gotta run. 3 days later, Sarah texted me. Not called, texted. Emma needed new equipment for some sport she was trying out, and could I pick up the tab? You know how kids are with their activities, Dad. The gear is so expensive these days. Again, I said yes. Again, I transferred the money. And again, no real conversation. No, how are you feeling, Dad? No, sorry about what happened at your birthday. Just, thanks, followed by silence. It was Michael who really opened my eyes, though. He stopped by the house one afternoon unannounced, which used to make me happy. I thought maybe he just wanted to spend time with his old man, maybe have a beer and talk about life. But he walked in with this look. This expression I'd seen him wear since he was a teenager when he wanted something. He sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd been called useless just 2 weeks earlier, and he started talking about this investment opportunity. Some buddy of his had a sure thing, just needed some capital to get started. I know it sounds risky, Dad, but this guy really knows what he's doing. I just need about $20,000 to get in on the ground floor. $20,000. Just like that. No small talk, no asking about my health, no acknowledging that his son had basically spat in my face at my own birthday party. Just, I need money, and you're the guy who has it. I looked at my youngest child, this man I'd raised, and I realized something that made my chest ache. He wasn't seeing his father sitting across from that table. He was seeing a resource, a means to an end. Let me think about it, I told him, which was something I'd never said before. Usually if my kids needed something, I just made it happen. But this time, those words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Michael looked surprised. Actually surprised. Like the idea that I might not immediately open my wallet was a foreign concept. Oh, okay. Well, don't think too long, Dad. This opportunity won't wait forever. After he left, I sat in that kitchen for hours. Just sat there, staring at the empty chair where he'd been sitting, where Tommy had been sitting when he called me useless, where all of them had been sitting while they watched my heart break and said nothing. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about one bad birthday. This wasn't about kids being kids or families going through rough patches. This was about 50 years of relationship patterns that I'd been too blind, or maybe too willing to see. I'd taught them that I was valuable for what I could provide, not for who I was. And now, at 70 years old, when my ability to provide was all they could see in me, well, what happens when that's no longer enough? What happens when the well runs dry? Or when I'm too old to be useful, even in that limited way? The answer was sitting right there in Tommy's words. I become useless, a burden, an old man taking up space and resources that could be better used elsewhere. But here's what none of them understood, what none of them had bothered to learn in all their years of taking from me. I didn't get to where I am by being anyone's fool. And I sure as hell didn't build what I built by letting people walk all over me, even if those people happened to share my DNA. It was time they learned who they were really dealing with. You know what I did the day after Michael left my house asking for $20,000 like it was pocket change? I went to my office. Not the fancy one downtown where I used to meet clients, but the small one I kept in my house, the one where I handled my personal affairs. I pulled out files I hadn't looked at in years. Financial statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, business records. I spread them across my desk like pieces of a puzzle, and for the first time in a long time, I really looked at what I'd built, not just the numbers, but what they represented. Every sacrifice, every missed family dinner, every weekend I spent working instead of playing catch in the backyard. Let me paint you a picture of what 50 years of 16-hour days looks like on paper. The construction company I started with nothing but determination and a borrowed pickup truck, it grew into one of the most respected firms in the state. We built schools, hospitals, office complexes. We employed over 200 people at our peak. I sold it 10 years ago for more money than my father made in his entire lifetime. The real estate investments I started with that first little house, they turned into a portfolio of 37 properties across 3 counties, commercial buildings, residential rentals, that shopping center on Maple Street where my kids used to go to the movies when they were teenagers. All of it carefully chosen, methodically acquired, properly maintained. The stock investments, the bonds, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policies. Jesus, just adding it up made my head spin. I'd always known I was comfortable, but seeing it all laid out like that, I realized I'd built something substantial, something that could take care of my family for generations if managed properly. And every single penny of it, I'd earned thinking about them. David, Sarah, Michael, their children, their children's children. When David graduated college, I gave him $50,000 to start his business. Not a loan, a gift. When Sarah got married, her wedding cost me more than most people make in 2 years, and I never blinked. When Michael decided he wanted to be an artist instead of joining the family business, I supported him financially for 3 years while he found himself. The college funds I set up for the grandchildren. Emma's alone is worth more than most adults have in their retirement accounts, and she's only 14. Tommy's fund could pay for medical school if he wanted. Michael's boy could go anywhere, study anything, without worrying about money for even a second. But it wasn't just the big gestures, you know. It was the constant stream of smaller ones that really added up over the years. Every time David's business hit a rough patch, I was there. Mortgage payments, equipment loans, payroll when cash flow got tight. I probably kept that company afloat single-handedly for the first 5 years it existed. Sarah's family vacations to Disney World, to Europe, to those fancy resorts in the Caribbean. Who do you think made those possible? Her husband makes decent money, but not take the whole family to Italy for 2 weeks. Money. And Michael, Michael, my artistic son, who still, at 38 years old, calls me every few months with some new crisis. Car repairs, medical bills, rent when gallery sales are slow. I've been his safety net for so long, I don't think he even knows what it feels like to truly stand on his own. The grandchildren's birthday parties, their sports equipment, their summer camps, their private tutoring when school got challenging. I made all of that happen. Not because they asked, but because I wanted them to have every opportunity, every advantage I could possibly give them. I sat there at my desk, surrounded by the evidence of a lifetime of giving, and I tried to remember the last time any of them had said thank you. Really said it. Not just those automatic words you say when someone hands you something, but actual gratitude, acknowledgement of what these gifts meant, what they cost, not just in money, but in time and sacrifice. I couldn't remember, not once. But you know what I could remember? Tommy rolling his eyes when I tried to tell him stories about the old days. Emma sighing dramatically when I offered to help with her homework. The way all of them seemed to come alive when I left the room, like my presence was dampening their fun. When had I become the old man they tolerated instead of the patriarch they respected? When had Grandpa's here become something they endured rather than celebrated? The answer was staring at me from those financial statements. I'd become their bank, not their family, their resource, not their role model. And banks, well, banks are useful when you need them, but nobody loves a bank. Nobody sits around missing a bank when it's closed. I closed those files and sat back in my chair. And for the first time since my birthday, I felt something besides hurt and confusion. I felt clarity, crystal clear, cold clarity about exactly what I was dealing with. They saw me as useless now because I'd trained them to see me as nothing more than useful in the first place. But here's something they never bothered to learn about their old, useless grandfather. I didn't build all this by being sentimental about bad investments. And that's exactly what 50 years of one-sided giving had turned out to be. A very expensive investment that was never going to pay dividends. Time to cut my losses. The weeks after I went through those files, man, it was like someone had switched off a light inside me. But not in a depressed way, you understand? More like I'd been living in this bright, noisy room for years, and suddenly someone turned off all the distractions so I could finally see what was really there. The phone calls stopped being automatic yeses. When David called about needing help with another temporary cash flow problem, I found myself saying, "Let me get back to you on that." The surprise in his voice was almost comical, like he'd called the bank and been told they needed to check his credit. But it wasn't just the money requests that I started seeing differently. It was everything. Sarah invited me to Emma's soccer game the following Saturday. Now, normally I would have dropped everything, moved meetings, canceled appointments, whatever it took to be there cheering in the stands. But this time, I really listened to how she asked. "Emma has a game Saturday at 2. You should come if you're not doing anything." If I'm not doing anything. Like my time was just this empty void waiting to be filled with whatever scraps of attention they were willing to throw my way. Like I was sitting around the house with nothing but loneliness and boredom, just hoping someone would give me a purpose. "I'll check my schedule," I told her. Another pause of surprise. "Your schedule?" "Yes, Sarah. My schedule. I'll let you know." I did go to that game, but I sat further back in the stands than usual, just watching. Emma played well, scored a goal, and afterwards she ran over to her friends instead of coming to see me first, like she used to when she was younger. That was fine. Kids grow up. I get that. But when the game was over and I was walking to my car, I overheard Sarah talking to another parent. "Oh, that's my father-in-law." He doesn't have much going on these days, so he comes to all the games. It's sweet, I guess, but sometimes I worry he's getting too attached. You know how lonely old people can get. Lonely old people. Too attached. I stood there next to my car, keys in my hand, and realized that's how they saw me. Not as a grandfather who loves spending time with his granddaughter, but as a lonely old man with nothing better to do than follow children around sports fields. The really funny part? I had plenty going on. I was on the board of 3 charities, I volunteered at the Veterans Center twice a week, I had a standing poker game with 5 other retired businessmen every Thursday night. I traveled, I read, I had friends and interests and a life that didn't revolve around them. But they never asked about any of that. In their minds, I'd become this empty vessel whose only purpose was to be available for their convenience. Michael's son Jake had a birthday party 2 weeks later, 15 years old, and I'd never missed one of his birthdays. Not one. I'd always brought thoughtful gifts, spent time talking with him, tried to be the involved grandfather I'd wished I'd had at his age. But when Michael called to invite me, there was something different in his tone. Casual, almost distracted. Jake's party is Sunday at 3. It's just family, nothing fancy. You don't have to bring anything big. Don't have to bring anything big. Like my presence wasn't the gift, just whatever was in the box I carried through the door. I went to that party too, but I watched instead of participated. Watched how the kids all huddled together with their phones, barely acknowledging the adults. Watched how my own children seemed more interested in talking to each other than including me in conversations. Watched how Jake opened my carefully chosen gift, a vintage watch that had belonged to my father, with a polite, "Thanks, Grandpa," before immediately moving on to the next present. That watch had history, stories. It had meaning beyond its monetary value. But to Jake, it was just something else to add to the pile, no different from the gift cards and video games he got from everyone else. After the cake was cut and the excitement died down, I found myself standing alone by the kitchen window while life went on around me. That's when I overheard David and Michael talking in the next room. "Is Dad okay?" Michael asked. "He seems different lately." "Different how?" "I don't know. Quieter. When I asked him about that investment thing, he didn't just say yes like he usually does. And Sarah said he's been weird about family stuff too." David lowered his voice. "Maybe we should talk to him. I mean, he's getting older. Sometimes when people start losing their edge, they get paranoid about money, suspicious of family. We might need to think about, making sure he's making good decisions." Making sure he's making good decisions, like I was some doddering old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own life anymore. I left that party early, made my excuses, hugged everyone goodbye, and drove home in complete silence. That night, I sat in my living room with a glass of whiskey, the same whiskey I used to share with my father before he passed. And I made a decision that had been building for weeks. If they wanted to treat me like a liability instead of a legacy, if they saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a patriarch to be respected, then it was time they learned what it really meant to lose something valuable. But I wasn't going to make this decision in anger or hurt. No, I was going to make it the way I'd made every important decision in my business life. Carefully, strategically, and with the help of someone who understood the legal implications of what I was about to do. It was time to call my lawyer. You know what's funny about being successful in business for 50 years? You learn to read people. You learn to see through the smiles and the handshakes to what people really want from you. It's a survival skill in the corporate world, and apparently, I just never thought to use it on my own family. But once you start looking, once you start really paying attention to the patterns, you can't unsee them. The morning after Jake's birthday party, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down with my calendar and looked at the past 6 months of my life. Every phone call, every visit, every family gathering. I wrote it all down like I was analyzing a business relationship. David had contacted me 11 times. 11. Sounds like a lot, right? Like a son who cares about his father and wants to stay in touch. Except when I looked at the details, 8 of those calls were requests for money or help with something. 2 were invitations to events where they needed gift-giving grandparents. 1 was a pocket dial. Not a single call where he just wanted to talk to his dad. Sarah was even worse. 14 contacts, but 13 of them were about the grandchildren needing something. Dance classes, summer camp, new clothes, school supplies, field trip money. The 14th was her asking if I could pick Emma up from school because her car was in the shop. Useful grandpa, reliable grandpa, available whenever you need something grandpa. And Michael. Jesus, Michael was the worst of all. 19 calls in 6 months, and every single one was about money. Every single one. His rent, his car payment, gallery fees for his art shows, materials for his sculptures, even what he called borrowing money that we both knew he'd never pay back. When was the last time any of them had called just to say hi? Just to see how I was doing? Just because they missed their father and wanted to hear his voice? I couldn't remember. That's how long it had been. But here's what really got to me. I started thinking about what they knew about my life. My actual life, not just my ability to solve their problems. Did they know I'd been having trouble sleeping lately? Did they know my back had been aching more than usual, probably from all those years of construction work finally catching up with me? Did they know I'd been thinking about my own father a lot recently, missing him in ways I hadn't when I was younger, and too busy building my empire to appreciate what I'd lost? Did they know I'd been reading more? Trying to understand things I'd been too busy to think about when I was working all the time? Did they know I'd started writing down stories from my childhood, thinking maybe someday the grandchildren would want to know where they came from? Did they know anything about who I was beyond what I could do for them? The answer was no. They knew Grandpa the ATM, Grandpa the problem solver, Grandpa the reliable safety net, but the man inside all of that, the one with thoughts and feelings and dreams and fears, they had no idea he even existed. And you know what the really sad part was? I'd allowed it to happen. Hell, I'd encouraged it. Every time they needed something, I said yes before they even finished asking. Every problem they brought to me, I solved without making them work for solutions. Every financial crisis, I smoothed over with my checkbook instead of letting them learn to handle their own lives. I'd turned myself into exactly what they saw me as, a resource instead of a relationship. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my parents are buried. I hadn't been there in months, which made me feel guilty. But sometimes you need to talk to people who knew you before you became who everyone expects you to be. I sat on the bench next to their headstones and told them everything. About the birthday dinner, about the casual cruelty of being called useless, about the slow realization that I'd spent 50 years building a fortune for people who saw me as nothing more than the keeper of that fortune. "What would you do, Dad?" I asked out loud, not caring if anyone heard me talking to a gravestone. How do you handle it when the people you love most don't actually see you at all? The wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the oak tree above his grave, and I swear I could hear his voice. Not literally, you understand, but that voice in my head that sounded like all the lessons he'd tried to teach me when I was too young and ambitious to listen. A man's worth isn't measured by what he gives away, son. It's measured by what he stands for. What did I stand for? What had I taught my children and grandchildren about strength, about character, about earning respect instead of just expecting it? I'd taught them that love meant never having to face consequences. I'd taught them that family meant always getting bailed out. I'd taught them that being related to someone meant you could treat them however you wanted because blood was thicker than accountability. No wonder they called me useless. In their world, I was just this old man who handed out money and sat quietly while they lived their real lives. I wasn't a patriarch worth respecting. I was an enabler worth exploiting. Sitting there in that cemetery, surrounded by people who'd lived full lives and left real legacies, I understood something that should have been obvious years ago. The greatest gift I could give my family wasn't my money. It was teaching them to value something other than my money. And the only way to do that was to show them what life looked like when that safety net wasn't automatically there. They thought I was useless? Fine. Let them find out what useful really meant when it was gone. But I wasn't going to do this halfway. If I was going to teach them a lesson about respect and consequences, it was going to be a lesson they'd never forget. Time to show them what this useless old man was really capable of. The drive home from the cemetery was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Not because of traffic or distance, but because I could feel something shifting inside me with every mile. Like I was shedding an old skin that had gotten too tight, too uncomfortable to wear anymore. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a few minutes, just looking at my house. The house I'd bought when David was 5 and Sarah was 3, when Michael was just a gleam in our eyes. The house where I'd raised my children, where I'd dreamed about grandchildren running through these same rooms someday. It was a good house, a house that represented everything I'd worked for, but sitting there, I realized it had also become something I'd never intended, a monument to my own invisibility. I went straight to my office and pulled out a legal pad. Old school, I know, but some decisions require the weight of pen on paper, not the click of computer keys. At the top of the page, I wrote 2 words, my legacy. Then I started making a list. Not of what I owned, but of what I'd actually accomplished in 70 years of life. I'd built a business from nothing and employed hundreds of people over the decades. I'd created jobs, contributed to the economy, built structures that would outlast me by generations. That mattered. I'd served my country in Vietnam, came home when a lot of good men didn't. I'd earned respect through service and sacrifice. That mattered. I'd been married to the love of my life for 43 years before cancer took her from me. We'd built something real together, something meaningful. That mattered. I'd raised 3 children who'd never gone hungry, never lacked for opportunities, never had to wonder if they were loved. Maybe I'd done it imperfectly. Maybe I'd been too busy providing to be as present as I should have been, but I'd given them everything I had to give. That should have mattered. But somehow, in their eyes, none of that added up to anything more than useful until I became useless. I set down my pen and really thought about what I wanted my legacy to be. Not just the money I'd leave behind, but the lessons, the values, the understanding of what it means to earn something instead of just expecting it. Right now, my will was pretty straightforward. Everything split 3 ways between my children, with trust funds already established for the grandchildren. A comfortable inheritance that would set them all up for life, reward them for the simple accident of being born into this family. But what had that approach taught them so far? That money comes without effort. That family means you get taken care of no matter how you behave. That respect is optional as long as the checks keep coming. I thought about my own father, how he'd made me work for everything I'd ever gotten from him, how he'd taught me the value of earning respect instead of demanding it, how he'd shown me that a man's character was built through struggle, not comfort. What kind of character was I building in my family by making their lives so easy that they saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their next handout? The answer was staring me in the face. I wasn't building character at all. I was building entitlement. I picked up my pen again and started writing a different kind of list. Organizations that could use my support. causes that aligned with the values I'd actually tried to live by. Groups that understood the difference between need and want. The Veterans Center, where I volunteered, could expand their programs with the right funding. The Scholarship Foundation at the community college could help kids who actually wanted to work for their education. The Children's Hospital could build that new wing they'd been dreaming about. People who would appreciate help because they understood what it meant to struggle. People who would use my legacy to build something meaningful instead of just making their already comfortable lives a little more comfortable. But this wasn't just about punishing my family for their ingratitude. This was about teaching them something I should have taught them years ago, that love and respect have to flow both ways to mean anything at all. I wasn't going to cut them off completely. That would just be cruel, and cruelty was never the point. But I was going to restructure things in a way that made them think about what they'd lost, what they'd taken for granted, what they might need to do differently if they wanted to rebuild what we'd once had. The trust funds for the grandchildren would stay, but with conditions: good grades, community service, proof that they were becoming contributing members of society instead of just consumers. They could have their inheritance, but they'd have to earn it the way every generation should. As for my children, well, they were grown adults with their own lives and their own resources. They'd gotten plenty from me over the years. Maybe it was time they learned to stand on their own 2 feet instead of leaning on their father every time life got challenging. I closed that legal pad and put it in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, I'd make some phone calls, set up some meetings, start the process of turning these thoughts into legal reality. But tonight, I was going to sit in my living room with that glass of whiskey and think about the conversation I'd need to have with my lawyer, a man who'd known me for 20 years, who'd helped me build and protect everything I'd worked for. A man who was about to help me teach my family the most important lesson I'd ever given them. They wanted to know what this useless old man still had in him. They were about to find out. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes after a sleepless night of hard thinking. You know that feeling? When you've wrestled with something so long that your mind finally stops fighting and just settles into what needs to be done. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and dialed a number I'd known by heart for 20 years. Harrison, Caldwell and Associates. This is Margaret. Margaret, it's Frank Morrison. Is Jim available this morning? I need to discuss some changes to my estate planning. Jim Harrison had been my attorney since I sold the construction company. Sharp as a tack, straight shooter, the kind of lawyer who told you what you needed to hear instead of what you wanted to hear. More importantly, he'd known me long enough to understand that when Frank Morrison called about estate planning, it wasn't a casual conversation. Frank, his voice came through the phone with that familiar warmth. Good to hear from you. It's been, 6 months since our last review? Everything all right? I need to see you today if possible, Jim. Some things have come up that require immediate attention. There was a pause. Jim knew me well enough to hear the weight in my voice. Of course. Can you be here at 11? I'll clear my schedule. I'll be there. The drive to Jim's office gave me time to organize my thoughts. This wasn't going to be an emotional conversation. I'd made my decision based on logic and necessity, and I was going to present it that way. Jim needed to understand the legal implications, not the family drama that led to this moment. His office hadn't changed much over the years. Same mahogany desk, same law books lining the walls, same picture of his own grandchildren on the credenza. The irony wasn't lost on me. Frank, you look good, he said, shaking my hand. Retirement's been treating you well. Can't complain. I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. Jim, I need to make some significant changes to my will and estate planning. Complete restructuring. He pulled out a legal pad and pen, falling into his professional mode. All right, what are we looking at? I took a breath and laid it out for him. Clean, straightforward, like I was discussing a business transaction, which, in a way, I suppose I was. I want to reduce the direct inheritance to my children from equal shares to $25,000 each. The remainder of my estate, after the grandchildren's existing trust funds are honored, goes to charity. Jim's pen stopped moving. He looked up at me with those sharp eyes that had served him well in 3 decades of law practice. Frank, we're talking about what? Roughly $4 million being redirected? That's a substantial change. Can I ask what's prompted this? Let's just say I've had some clarity about what kind of legacy I want to leave. He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. You know, I have to ask, is this about your health? Any pressure from outside sources? Any concerns about your decision-making capacity? I almost smiled at that. Leave it to a good lawyer to cover all the bases. My health is fine, my mind is sharp, and nobody's pressuring me into anything. This is my decision, made for my own reasons. But I appreciate you asking. All right. He picked up his pen again. Tell me about the charitable distributions. Do you have specific organizations in mind? I pulled out a list I'd prepared. Veterans Center gets $500,000 for facility expansion. Community College Scholarship Fund gets $750,000. Children's Hospital gets $1 million for the new pediatric wing. The rest gets divided between 3 other charities I've researched. Jim whistled low. These are substantial gifts, Frank. Life-changing money for these organizations. That's the point. I want my money to go where it'll make a real difference, where people will appreciate what it can accomplish. And your children, have you discussed this with them? No, and I don't intend to until it's finalized. He made some notes, then looked up at me again. Frank, I've been doing this long enough to know that major estate changes usually come from major family issues. You don't have to tell me the details, but I need to make sure this isn't something you might regret later. I appreciated his concern, I really did, but my mind was made up. Jim, let me ask you something. In your experience, does inherited wealth build character or destroy it? He thought about that for a moment. Honestly, it depends on how it's handled. But I've seen more families torn apart by unearned wealth than brought together by it. Exactly. My children are adults with their own careers and resources. They've already received more help from me over the years than most people see in a lifetime. $25,000 each is enough to show them they're still my children, but not enough to make them comfortable with mediocrity. And if they contest the will, on what grounds? I'm 70 years old, not 90. I'm mentally competent, not under any undue influence, and I'm making these decisions freely. Besides, I leaned forward. I want you to document everything carefully. Medical evaluation if necessary, video testimony, whatever it takes to make sure my wishes are ironclad. Jim nodded slowly. We can do that. But Frank, are you sure you don't want to have a conversation with your family first? Sometimes just talking through issues can... No. My voice came out harder than I intended. They've had 70 years to have conversations with me. Real conversations, not just requests for money or obligatory holiday visits. If they wanted a relationship with their father, they should have built one when it mattered. We spent the next 2 hours going through the details. Legal language, distribution schedules, contingencies, safeguards. Jim was thorough, as always, but I could see the questions in his eyes. The concern for an old friend who was making decisions that would change everything. As I was getting ready to leave, he walked me to the door. Frank, this is going to be a shock to your family. You realize that, right? Jim, being called useless by your own grandchildren while your children sit there and say nothing, that's a shock too. Sometimes shock is the only thing that wakes people up. He shook my hand at the door. I'll have the preliminary documents ready by Friday. But Frank, if you change your mind, Even at the last minute, that's okay too. Nobody expects you to be perfect. I looked at this man who'd helped me navigate 20 years of legal decisions, who'd protected my interests and counseled me through difficult times. I appreciate that, Jim. But I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for respect. And sometimes the only way to get respect is to show people what they lose when they don't give it. The drive home was quiet, but not empty. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just reacting to hurt feelings. My family thought I was useless. They were about to find out exactly how useful I'd been, and more importantly, they were about to learn what it felt like when that usefulness was no longer available to them. The lesson was about to begin. Jim pulled into my driveway at 3 on the dot, the way men do when they've spent lifetimes respecting other people's time. I'd asked the kids to come by at 3:30. Family discussion, I'd said. No details, no explanations, just time and place. He came in with his briefcase and that steady presence that's calmed me through more than one hard decision. We set up at the dining room table. Same table where I'd been called useless, except today it looked different. Legal pads, neatly tabbed folders, a little voice recorder switched off for now. Ready? Jim asked. I've been ready since the night they forgot who I am, I said. By 3:30, the doorbell started. First David and his wife, then Sarah and hers, then Michael, alone, looking like a man late to his own life. The grandchildren had been told to stay home. This wasn't for them. Not yet. They came into the dining room expecting, I don't know, that I needed help with some forms, or maybe that I was about to ask them to start driving me to appointments. You can smell assumptions if you've lived long enough. Dad, what's going on? David asked, glancing at Jim. This is Jim Harrison, I said. My attorney. Michael gave a half laugh he tried to pass off as relaxed. We didn't need a lawyer for a family meeting. No, I said, but you'll need one to understand the consequences of the last few months. Jim nodded to me, then opened his case. He spoke plainly, the way he always has. No theatrics, no barbs. Mr. Morrison asked me to update his estate plan and the related instruments. Those changes are complete in draft and will be executed by the end of the week. Today's meeting is a courtesy. Sarah's smile was small and diplomatic. Dad, you didn't have to rush into anything. We could have. Sarah, I said, not unkindly. Let Jim finish. Jim laid out the essentials, each point like a nail driven home clean and true. The children, David, Sarah, and Michael, would each receive $25,000 directly. The grandchildren's trusts would remain, but would now include conditions, grades, community service, employment, or education milestones. Distributions tied to effort, not entitlement. The majority of my estate would be directed to charitable gifts earmarked for expansion at the Veterans Center, scholarships at the community college, the pediatric wing at the Children's Hospital, and several other organizations already vetted. Powers of attorney and medical directives were reaffirmed. Decision-making capacity documented by independent evaluation. Video testimony scheduled. Silence fell like snow, soft at first, then heavy enough to bend branches. David was the first to speak, voice caught between reason and panic. Dad, this is extreme. We're your family. You are, I said, and you'll still be treated like it. 25,000 is not exile. It's simply not a reward for behavior you haven't shown. Michael's jaw worked. So this is punishment. No, I said. This is correction. Sarah blinked rapidly, the way people do when they're rearranging a story in their heads. Dad, if this is about the birthday, Tommy's a child. He didn't mean it. It wasn't just Tommy, I said. It was the quiet after. I heard more in the silence than I did in his words. Jim, professional as ever, slid a single-page summary across the table. These are the distribution percentages and triggers. You're welcome to review and ask clarifying questions. The documents themselves are private. David didn't touch the paper. We've depended on you. You can't change everything overnight. I changed nothing overnight, I said. It's taken me 70 years to learn this lesson. Michael's voice rose. You're giving our inheritance to strangers. To causes, I corrected. To people who will treat it like fuel for effort, not oxygen for laziness. Sarah's face softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. Dad, did we make you feel alone? I let the question hang there. Some truths need a little oxygen before they burn. You made me feel invisible, I said, and it turns out invisible men do their best thinking. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a stack of facts in the center of the table, and 3 adult children realizing for the first time that I had been making decisions long before they knew decisions existed. Jim will handle any questions, I said, standing. I'm going to make coffee. If you stay, you'll have it. If you leave, you'll have your summary. No one left. The silence for once felt like respect being born. We moved to the living room, coffee cups in hand, the papers a quiet weight between us. I sat in my old leather chair. The 3 of them took the couch and the edge of the hearth, like kids waiting on a verdict. I'm not angry, I began. Anger fades. Principles stay. Today is about principles. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then say it plain. Respect goes both ways, I said. When it doesn't, money becomes a weapon. I won't arm disrespect. Michael scoffed, then caught himself. We were worried about you. We thought maybe you were slipping. Convenient theory, I said. It explains away your discomfort without asking you to change. Sarah set her cup down carefully, as if the table might bruise. You're right about my part. I've been asking, not asking after. That's on me. I looked at her. That's an apology that costs something. I can hear it. David swallowed. I was wrong, too. About the birthday, about the calls. I kept treating you like the department that fixes things. He shook his head. It's ugly to say out loud. Ugly truth cleans a wound, I said. Pretty lies infect it. Michael stared at the fireplace, jaw set. So this is it. The conditions, the cuts, the charities, and we just accept it. You accept what you can live with, I said. You argue what you can defend. But you don't bully what you didn't build. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The hard thing about a man standing is you realize how long you've been leaning. I went on, calm as a ledger. This isn't exile. You're still my children. Holidays are still at this table. Advice is still free. Love is still here. I tapped the folder. But the easy money is gone. And with it, the confusion about what I'm worth. David nodded slowly, like a man who'd just found the floor in a dark room. What do you want from us, Dad? Not for the money, for us. Presence, I said, not performance. A phone call that isn't a request. A visit that isn't a transaction. And when your children speak with cruelty, I want you to parent them out loud. Sarah's eyes shone. You'll meet me halfway. I'll meet you every inch you walk, I said. I'm old, not idle. Michael stood, agitated, then sat again, smaller this time. Maybe I've been hiding behind your wallet, he said, voice low. Maybe art got easier when rent got covered. Art gets better when stakes get higher, I said. Most things do. Nobody shouted. Nobody stormed out. David reached for the summary. Sarah asked Jim what service hours would mean in practice for Emma's trust. Michael stared at his hands like they belonged to a new man who might build something with them. I didn't need their approval. I needed their understanding. I didn't ask if they agreed. I asked if they heard me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed they did. Here's my final word on it, I said, standing. A man's age is not a downgrade. It's an upgrade in clarity. I'm not worth less because I do less. I'm worth what I've always been, measured in character, not output. You will treat me accordingly, or you will treat me less often. No one argued. Respect, when it finally arrives, is quiet. After they left, the house held that soft echo of spent voices. I cleaned the cups, wiped the table, put Jim's summary in the safe. Routine is a kind of prayer when you're learning to live differently. I took a walk at dusk, the sky doing that violet thing it does when it forgives the day. I thought about the word legacy, the way we toss it around like it's just a dollar sign with a last name. Legacy is not what you give people, it's what you leave in them. Money doesn't stay. Not really. It moves, it leaks, it vanishes into kitchens and car lots and vacations no one remembers. But respect, if you plant it, puts down roots. Accountability grows branches. Gratitude blooms late, but lasts longer than any check. I thought about my father's hands, scarred and sure, and how he taught me to square a board by listening to it. Wood will tell you when it's true, he'd say. Turns out families will too. You just have to stop sanding over the knots and feel where it resists. What do I want carved into the inside of my children, where names and numbers can't reach? I want them to know a man is not measured by his balance sheet, but by what he's willing to balance. Mercy with truth, love with boundaries, provision with pride. I want my grandchildren to learn that help is holy when it honors effort, and that no can be a gift that makes room for a better yes. I want my name, when spoken after I'm gone, to taste like steadiness, not like a fountain they miss drinking from, but like a compass they keep using. Back home, I sat at the dining room table again. Same wood, same grain, different gravity. I wrote 3 letters, one to each child. Not about money, about moments. The time David fell off his bike and got back on because I refused to carry him. The night Sarah stood at the window after her mother died and I told her the truth, that grief is love with nowhere to go, so you build it a room and visit often. The day Michael brought me a sculpture of welded scrap, and I told him it was beautiful because it held together what shouldn't. I signed each letter the way my father signed the last one he ever sent me. Stand up. I love you. I don't know who changes and who doesn't. I can't manage that outcome any more than I can manage the weather, but I've changed the climate in this house. I've turned off the old rain that made everything swell and warp. Now we'll see what dries straight. What a man leaves behind isn't a number, it's a pattern, a way of being that echoes. If I've done anything worth a stone and a date, it's this. I remembered, just in time, that love without respect is charity, and charity without wisdom is waste. I am not useless. I am used well, by purpose, by principle, by the people who will never know my name, but will feel the warmth of a roof we built together. When my time comes, they can split the silverware if they want. The good stuff is already distributed, quietly, deliberately, into the hearts of anyone willing to carry it. And if my family learns to honor a man while he's alive rather than praise him when he's gone, that will be my richest bequest. The rest, as the lawyers say, is in good order.